This is how it is with werewolves. Even when they lie, it's the truth. That's a line that struck me and stuck with me from the novel Mongrels by Stephen Graham Jones. I'm going to back up a little bit before I get into the review of this book, which feels like it's going to be tough for me to review. But anyway, back up just a hair. Why I read it. It's been a little while now, but I started buying books from a publisher in the United Kingdom called SST Publications. They produced a collection of stories from an author, Joe R. Lansdale, whom I collect. And from there, I started paying attention to their stuff. They put out some books from him, and they came out with a book right here called The Only Good Indians by a fellow named Stephen Graham Jones. I didn't know the author, I didn't know the book, but I had already grown to love this publisher in short order, and looking at this cover, I was awestruck. I was struck with awe, if that's what that means. It looks so doggone good, I could not resist. I had to buy the book. Again, I don't know the author, I don't know the book. The book just looks so good, so I judged a book by the cover. That's what you're supposed to do, right? Judge the book by the cover. Otherwise, why is there a cover? I'm just kidding. Now, I hadn't read the book, and then another one came out by the same author, Stephen Graham Jones from SST Publications, and I looked at this cover by Francesco Gianni, and I judged a book by the cover. This cover looks so doggone good, phenomenal. I had to buy it, and I bought this one with even more excitement than the other one. Well, time passed on, and one day it occurred to me that I had some of these phenomenal looking books on my shelves that I love and I'm proud of, and I haven't read the book. Isn't that kind of the point of a book? Read the thing. SST came along and they published a couple more books, or they haven't come out yet, but they pre-ordered, sold out a couple more books by Stephen Graham Jones, and I jumped on those as well. Figured, hey, in for $1, in for a dime, in for a dime, in for $1, in for whatever. I'm in. So I bought a couple more, and I finally got around to reading one of them, Mongrels. And here we are. So I'll buy nice books, but I don't like to read them, because when I read a book, I want to be able to truly enjoy the experience. And that means I don't want to have to worry about taking good care of my precious. Don't get fingerprints, don't bend stuff, don't get it dirty, wrinkled, whatever. I want to be able to handle the book and read it on the porch, at the table, put it in my suitcase and go somewhere with it, put it in the back seat of the car and take it somewhere. I don't want to worry about the book itself when I'm reading. So I got me a soft cover. I think I got this one at a Second and Charles one time. Who cares? I got the book, and it was on the books what gots to be read pile, the TBR list, and it popped up on the top, and I read it. And here we go. To start with, I had jumped from a Grady Hendrix novel, which I loved. I did a review, you can look it up, into this book. And so I finished the book, closed it up, wiped off the tear, picked up this book, and started reading. I had maybe 15 or 20 more minutes I planned to read. And it hurt at first. Hurt my brain. I had to start yelling at my brain to get with the program. Because going from Grady Hendrix to Stephen Graham Jones, the prose is very different. And Stephen Graham Jones writes in a way that took me, at least in this book, it took me a little bit to get used to it. And it's weird, I don't understand it. Because I'd read a sentence, and I'd start with the next sentence, and I'd realize something didn't work. I'd go back and read the sentence again, and the sentence was perfect. Not a thing that I would change with a sentence, but it was almost as if the last word in the sentence, my brain automatically substituted something else for it, and I moved on, and then I realized it wasn't working. I go back, and I read the word that wasn't there. So it took my brain, I don't know, I can't explain it. It took my brain a minute to adjust to get in. But putting that aside, this book had me from the go. A few pages in, I was in. And it was a strange experience, because I I knew nothing of the book except for the cover. And I had the idea that it was about werewolves and not much else. There's a truck, there's a werewolf, and he's bloodied at the mouth, and that's about really all I knew going into the book. Some folks like to go into books that way, knowing nothing. I tend to prefer to kind of have an idea of what I'm getting into. It eliminates confusion. It eliminates hesitation, anxiety, worry that that I'm about to waste my time reading a book that I'm not going to like, whatever. But I immediately got into this book, and what I would eventually figure out is that this book is written like the old TV series in episodes, and not like modern television series where you take a 15-hour movie and you chop it up into 10 or 15 episodes. This was the old style, like Moonlighting, where every single week David Addison and Madison Hayes, Agnes DePesto, they're all the same characters in the same life, but every week they're going to be doing a different story. And this story is going to wrap up, and then the next week they're going to start a new story. And they're so episodic, I would call it, episodic book. And in there, from time to time, there would be one part of that story that would carry on to another one. When you put it all together in a whole, you have a story with an overarching theme of having to get from here to there. And I won't get into what that thing is, but I'll say it. Awesome. That's it. That's all I can tell you about that part of it. You go from here to there in this overarching theme, and it truly, truly delivers with extreme satisfaction. Now, going forward into the story, we essentially have a book written in first person. The author refers to himself, or the storyteller, not the author. The narrator in the book, a character in the book, refers to himself as different things practically every chapter. So one chapter he might be referring to himself as whatever, I don't remember. He would refer to himself as this, and he would refer to himself as that, a descriptive adjective over of what he is. And the book starts off with a brother and sister duo, Libby and Darren, a person referred to as Grandpa, and then a kid. I don't remember how old he was at the beginning. We'll just say 9, 10 years old, a kid. And Grandpa is at the very end of his life. The kind of a grandpa where the grandpa tells a story and the older kids roll their eyes and say, oh, he's nuts, he's off his rocker. That sort of vibe is what I was getting. But Grandpa says, we're werewolves. And he's telling werewolf stories. And the kid is he's enthralled in these werewolf stories. He loves them. Meanwhile, his uncle and his aunt, they're adults. They're rolling their eyes. They're pointing out how the story was different last time he told it, and it was different the time before that, and such as that. Grandpa keeps referring to them as all as werewolves, and we'll just leave it there. Grandpa is no longer in the story, and so now it's the aunt and uncle, Darren and Libby, and they're taking the narrator, the 10-year-old, the young boy, from town to town. They stay in the South because werewolves don't do good in the snow. It leaves tracks and stuff like that. So they're going from town to town. They were poor, scraping by to make money. Darren's doing usually not straight up things, stealing whatever. Libby works lots and lots of low paying jobs to try to feed the family, put a roof over their head and stuff like that. And every town that they get into, there ends up being a killing, an interaction, something like that forces them to have to leave. You find out Darren and Libby are werewolves. Spoiler alert. Darren and Libby are werewolves. It's no surprise. They're werewolves throughout. You learn it almost immediately. But the boy, you don't know. He doesn't turn into a werewolf. And that's part of what you have to try to find out. What we got to know, his mother, who died in childbirth, was not a werewolf. but he's got werewolf blood. And so you got an aunt that's hoping he can live a good life as a human, not having the issues that werewolves have to deal with. He's got an uncle that thinks being a werewolf is just badass, and he's hoping his nephew can be a badass werewolf like he is. And you've got that conflict. The boy wants to be a werewolf like his uncle, but he knows his aunt doesn't want him to be a werewolf. She wants him to be a person, a human, being able to live without the disadvantages of werewolfhood in a world full of humans. In this book, there are lots of werewolves out there. They're not the only ones. And werewolves have families, groups, cults, cliques, and they don't all follow the same rules. Their family passes down information to help them survive. And they tell stories about things. And in the stories, it's part entertainment and maybe not all true, but every story has a lesson that you glean from it. And as the book goes on, the young one, the narrator, starts to realize that in every one of these stories, there's a lesson in there. Part of it applies something that I can learn from. So they have their own rules. They have their own stories. You don't know if they're right or not, but they tell you, essentially, if you do this, you will die. It's going to ruin you. And they have all these different things that they go through. And throughout the book, they'll run into other people that either are familiar with werewolves or other werewolves that have the stories differently. And so at times they learn, hey, all this stuff that we've been living by, these things that we've been living under, these rules, they're not all right. And they learn some along the way. The book is familiar in a lot of ways. It reminds me of other books that had werewolf lore that I'd never heard of before. So I think this book borrows a little from here, a little from there, a little from the other, and some of it's very familiar. But essentially there's blood-born werewolves. You're born as a werewolf, and your mother is not going to survive childbirth. It's bad. And then there are werewolves that are maybe more like what we know of. Werewolves, they get bitten and they turn. They weren't killed and they turn, and they get kind of stuck in this quasi state. They don't go from human to wolf. They go from human, part wolf with a human torso and a wolf head, and they hate themselves, and it's not good. And so these werewolves, the true blood wolves, werewolves, they've got to take those out. They can't let them live because they're bad news, bad news. There's also werewolves that they refer to as sheep. And that's a werewolf that has found a way to no longer turn, to live as a human only, never turning into a wolf. And they also look at them as bad for business. So they, as a rule, they get rid of them too. There are a lot of revelations as the story goes. And while it is episodic, you'll read this little piece of the puzzle. As early in the book, they establish the theme that when our narrator turns 15, I think 15, 16 years old, there's going to come a point when the family's over. They're going to have to split up, and that's known right off the bat. But as they go through the story, each of these little episodes helps to develop more the characters. You get a better understanding of why they do what they do, who they are, the way they feel, the struggles that they go through, and stuff like that. And while it does feel like a bunch of stories, short stories that are combined into a bigger book, that's really what it is. You do get an overarching narrative of a bigger story. And I'll just say that when this thing was done, I had a tear in my eye. That's not a spoiler. It doesn't tell you that it was bad or good. The good guys won or the bad guys won. None of that kind of stuff. It's nothing like that. But I had a tear in my eye, and I had a lift in my chest, and I felt strong, and I felt excited, and I kind of wanted to know where we go from here. So maybe that's something that we can address in a future novel. But it's a tough story to review. It's a tough story because so many parts along the way, if I'm not careful, I'm going to spoil things. And it's kind of a complex story. I don't know. It's hard to describe. But I would recommend it guaranteed 100%ly. Mongrels by Stephen Graham Jones, I'm going to rate it a 5 stars out of 5, 10 stars out of 10, 100 stars out of 100. Very good. Maybe to this point in my life, maybe the best werewolf novel that I've ever read. Up next for me, as far as Stephen Graham Jones goes, I want to read The Only Good Indians. I've kind of read that Mongrels is his most popular book, it seems. In fact, I even saw an interview with him where he was saying that he kind of held Mongrels. I think this is what he said. He held Mongrels because he knew it was going to be his big book. So he published other books before letting Mongrels out. And it was great. If Stephen Graham Jones was an author that made one great book, there's a lot of them out there that made one great book, and Mongrels was his great book, I would say he had a great career, because Mongrels is phenomenal. I'm going to read this one again. If anybody ever asks my opinion, I'm going to ask for a follow-up to this book. And I think we'll just leave it at that. Phenomenal book. Stephen Graham Jones, I really like it. Mongrels, I really love it. And can't think of any more lies to tell, so c'est la vie, baby.